So, hello everybody. Thanks for tuning in this week. My guest this week is Edmund Cord, former professor of trumpet at Indiana University and former principal of the Israel Philharmonic, Utah Symphony. And this week's interview is sponsored by Dylan Music. So it's coming close to Christmas. So if you're looking to shop for any of your brass friends or yourself, go to dylanmusic.com and check them out. So it's my pleasure to welcome Edmund Cord. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Mark. Thanks for doing this.
Absolutely.
I want to correct one thing. I was always proud of the fact that my title at Indiana University was Professor of Music.
Very good.
I was not a professor of trumpet, technically. And you know, the trumpet is the vehicle for a lot of us with which we make music, but it's about learning the art form of music that's more important than whatever instrument we might play.
Absolutely. Even for violists.
That's true.
So
maybe especially.
So before we get going with some things in your career, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your beginnings in music and in growing up in Indianapolis area.
Yeah, I grew up on the east side of Indianapolis, and we were really blessed in that time that we had not only, I don't have a lot to compare with, but I think the public school system was really pretty good. I enjoyed a lot of the teachers I had. Of course, some of them I didn't like, but being objective as I could be, I thought they were all really qualified people. And that was certainly true in music. The Indianapolis Public Schools had a fantastic music program in those years. We had a summer camp with a junior high band and orchestra and a high school orchestra, and everybody sang the chorus. And we go to Lake, actually when I started out, it was Lake Tippecanoe in northern part of the state, and we were there a week and then came back and played a concert in Garfield Park on the south side of Indianapolis. And that was it was a real special time. I started to tell you before, there was a woman named Emma Helen Carlos who was general instrumental music teacher in the public schools. Had, I don't know how many, I suspect 3 or 4 or more schools on the east side. And as I recall, it was 4th grade, might have been 3rd, it was maybe 1st semester of 4th grade, something that she brought some instruments into our classroom for us to try. And I really loved the sound of the trombone, but until I got to be a sophomore in high school, I was not very tall at all. In fact, like still 7th grade, I was like one of the shortest guys in my class. And so trombone was like out. I can't deal with the slide. That's too much. And I knew with the other instrument that I really was attracted to was drums, but I knew without asking my folks, that's not going to fly. So she had various instruments. I got one close look at a clarinet and knew that is not the way I'm going to spend any part of my life. That's that's way too complicated. But she put a trumpet in my hands and I'm looking going, oh, 3 buttons. Okay, I'm on this. And she said, here, do this. And well, whatever it was, she told me with my lips and to blow, and some sound came out. And I remember thinking, I can do this. So that was it. And I had some kind of aptitude for it. I was taken into the junior high band as the only one out of my class year, and benefited from another fine instrumental music teacher named Paul Saunders, who did a lot of gigging. He was a woodwind doubler. So, I mean, these people were professional musicians right from the beginning. I was surprised and delighted much later on to find out that Ms. Carlos actually was from my dad's hometown of Connersville, Indiana. And I don't know much more about her personal history other than the fact that after she retired from teaching, she had a friend in Connorsville that they'd get together once a week and play Mozart sonatas. She was a violinist. And so that was kind of an interesting back connection to learn about. And then we had a really fine high school band, a man named Louis McKendifer, who had gone to the University of Michigan, was a horn player. He brought in, I think it was Max Pottag, one of the old time, really great horn players one time for like a master class thing. And we did Wagner transcriptions and William Schumann pieces and all kinds of really great repertoire. So he was a great inspiration for me. That camp, to talk about specific trumpet influences, that camp was one of them, because we had the faculty were teachers from other high schools and junior high schools in the Indianapolis public school system. And one of them was a man, I always forget his actual name, but he was known as Limey because his last name was Britton. So he was Limey Britton.
Okay.
And he would, after taps at night, he'd walk off into the woods and play beautiful old tunes like Danny Boy or some other beautiful song. And the sound of that cornet he was playing floating through the forest was really one of my first formative ideas about a trumpet sound, about a high brass sound. So that was very cool. I hooked up then with my first teacher, who fortunately lived pretty close to us. Max Woodbury was principal trumpet of the Indianapolis Symphony, and he lived just a few blocks away. So it was possible for, it was easy to get there. I remember riding my bike home from lessons sometimes. Max, another kind of circular connection, Max, I think was from Utah originally. So it was kind of funny that I ended up there for a good part of my career playing in the Utah Symphony. He came out and saw me one time. He had a daughter who was still living there. And I don't remember now if it was Logan or Ogden, but she'd found a historic book about Ogden, and there was a picture of Max playing his cornet in the pit band at the Egyptian Theater back in 1920 something or other. That was pretty cool. Max also briefly played in the Cleveland Orchestra, and it was like the 1929-1930 season or something like that. So Max, by the time I was working with him in the 60s, was more towards the end of his career, although he had a nice long life after that. I don't remember how old he was when he passed, but he was a fantastic player and a great inspiration to me, and a really, really fine teacher. He had very, very high standards. And somewhere in there, I not only was I going with my mother to hear concerts of the Indianapolis Symphony, but she had a lot of recordings, and that collection expanded, and I started hearing some repertoire. And there was one recording in particular. It was Boston with Leinsdorf doing Mahler 1, which I had never heard before. And I remember lying on the floor, hearing that recording. And when it comes to those big fanfares where suddenly there's crash, the hair standing up on the back of my neck. And I remember thinking, I want to do that. I want to do that. I had no idea what it would take for me to do that, but I wanted to do that. That was something that really flipped the switch for me. I listened to recordings of Al Hirt as well, and his, especially his lyricism, was really a great influence. My folks didn't listen to jazz, so that wasn't really the way I was going. I liked it, and I learned to appreciate and enjoy it more as time went on, certainly through college. I did play in what in those days was called a dance band. A guy at one of the other high schools on the east side, his folks put together some funding to have a library, and he got gigs, and we played a bunch of bunch of stuff. And I still see Greg Imboden around Indianapolis. He's a really fine woodwind player, contractor, and we don't see each other very often, but when we do, we've often are reminded about when I auditioned for him and how square I was. I did not swing. that came later. But that was an important part of my early education too.
That's a
All
pretty
of them.
amazing education because of all those teachers you had pointing you in the right direction right from the start.
Yeah, I really did. And while I didn't learn to apply it in my own teaching very well, Max did me a wonderful favor at one point, because naturally enough, when it came time for, my folks saw that I was getting kind of serious and thought, well, I need to have a really good quality instrument. What are we going to get? Well, we're going to get something. We'll find out what Mr. Woodbury recommends, and then we'll get him that kind of trumpet. So he played a Benge. He'd known Eldon Benge, and so that's what he played, mostly C trumpet. And I still have that Benge. It's a great trumpet from the early 60s. And when it came time to get, I think it was a C trumpet we ordered, and Max brought it over to the house. And I do not know what possessed me to ask him this, but I said, do you think I'll ever be first trumpet in a big orchestra? And Max looked at me and said, no. And you could probably see I was a little taken aback with that. He said, well, I always thought you had the ability, but you never worked hard enough. And that was really, really important because, my teenage ego was a bit smashed at that point. But there was, deep down inside, there was another part of me that went, oh yeah, well, I'll show you, you old bastard. Yeah, but I was very fond of him in spite of that bit of anger, because it hurt, but it was really, the truth telling of that was great. And that's what I needed, because I knew from a pretty early age that I had some talent going on, but I really didn't appreciate the value of the work. And in the end, that counts for much more. We don't get to take credit for whatever gift we have because of our DNA or a gift from God or whatever you want to take it. I mean, some people are very talented in one way and not so much in another, but in the long run, what really counts is how you use it and the work that you apply. Yeah. So that was hard for me. It was hard for me.
Well, sometimes those statements, I mean, I certainly had people say a couple of things to me that made me go, oh, you're right about that. I think you probably dug me out of a few of those, but
yeah. Well, and knowing how to work with it too is important. Ruth, my wife Ruth, came across a great phrase sometime recently. We haven't been able to track down the source of this, but it's so applicable. As soon as I heard it, I went, God, I can remember about 6 times in my life that I was like, gee, I needed to hear this back then. And I've shared it with students all over recently. And it goes, the magic you are seeking is in the work that you are avoiding.
Ooh. I like that.
Yeah. Well, it's so true. I mean, we it's easy to get in the practice room and we want to do the stuff so we can hear ourselves sounding good.
I don't want to float back to your early lessons, but I do remember once in school, you in a master class, making a point to say, you guys are working on stuff that you can't do or that's hard, but it's important for you to play something that you feel okay about every day too.
Oh, sure.
And I thought, I mean, I agree with the other statement you just made, but I remember you saying it and I thought, yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't just go hour after hour, day after day going, I can't do this. I can't, this is way too hard for me, or geez, that sounds terrible.
Right.
I mean, and okay, we can do that. But well, that comes to another absolutely fundamental concept that's important for all of us, teachers, players, just life, which is balance. You got to have this. You got to do the really hard stuff. And where's it written that you don't get to enjoy it sometimes? Right. And sometimes we have a happy confluence then when both of those things can come together. This is really hard work, and wow, it feels great. This
Yeah.
is really exciting. Yeah, that's how we get better.
What kind of things did Woodbury work with you on?
Oh, let's see. Well, Clark, which I never felt I really got good at. You know, I got to school and I heard people like Bert Truax, who then was one of my colleagues at the Music Academy of the West and then played in the Dallas Symphony for many years. And I'd hear from the practice room, and man, I can't even hear that fast, let alone play. It was that was I worked at it. I worked at it really hard, but that didn't come well. I think he had me doing Schlossberg kind of stuff. There was another book that was I can't remember the name now, but it was a very progressive sequential sort of thing that had a variety of materials in it that I haven't heard about anybody using for a long time. And you know, if we all forget the names, then that's why nobody knows to use it. But we also did a lot of orchestral stuff. He had me starting to transpose. In fact, he asked me one day, "Can you transpose?" And I had heard the term, and I had, you know, made it my business to learn about music enough that I knew what the idea was. It's like if there's a piece that's in E flat major, like, okay, we could play it also the same music in F major, you know, or C or something. So I said, yeah, I got it. You got something I can write down? He said, no, I don't mean write it down. I mean to look at the music and transpose while you're playing. And I went, no, I didn't know about that. But we started in the international series of excerpts. The first 5 were edited by somebody named Bartold, I never knew, and the other 5 by Bob Nagel. And there are tons of mistakes in those things, not very good. But for starting out, you know, to get the idea, what does it take to just play the notes and learn the rhythms and understand the different kinds of notation, the different kind of styles and sounds. Those excerpts, those little chunks of all those pieces are great, you know. And we went through all Beethoven symphonies and did Tchaikovsky and Brahms and a bunch of other stuff. He told me one of my lessons, particularly, he pointed something, and it might have been like towards in Tchaikovsky 5 or something, something that had an ascending line that went to a high C. And he looked at me and said, "What note do you think people miss most often?" Well, I said, "Well, the high note." And he said, "This one." And he pointed to the note after the high one, which is absolutely correct. You know, and I don't know how much psychology Max ever studied, but he certainly was a keen observer of his own behavior and that of others in playing, and said, no, everybody's gunning for, and they practice really hard so that they can, you know, their goal is the high note. And then when they get there, they think, oh, I got it. And next thing you do, you screw up, which I would explain later by saying, well, yeah, saying I got it, that's not the musical thought that you need to have to play the next note and then note that follows. You have to be thinking the music, not thinking about the music.
Right.
So that was a great lesson. I also learned from him a little bit about conductors, which sort of helped set me up. In fact, the end of Tchaikovsky 5, I had worked on. I was really prepared. I'm ready to play it. And I started playing in the lesson, and Max is tapping the time on my knee. So I were going, and I go on. And then where it repeats. He kept faster and faster. And I look, you know, I was like falling apart at the end of that. And as I finish and take the horn off my face, I look over and he's got this real disgusted, sardonic look on his face. And he goes, Savitsky.
Because he knew it was going to happen at some point with somebody.
Yeah, well, see, that's Savitsky. Fabian Savitsky was the music director of the Indianapolis Symphony long time ago. And that was, you know, that was a way of Max's saying, yeah, sometimes those guys do really dumb stuff, but you know what? You have to be prepared for anything. Right. This can happen. Yeah, so that was important to learn.
or I mean, you mentioned the Boston recording of Mahler one. Was there a particular orchestra or sound that you were heading towards at that point, or was it more kind of just
Um,
various things?
no,
Various,
I was taking it all in. I
yeah.
was taking it all in. I had there were some fantastic recordings of the Boston Symphony with Charles Munch.
Mhm.
There was an LP of nothing but Berlioz overtures, and my God, if you want to hear short notes, yeah, they were doing it, and it was great. It was really great. But I listened to all those. There were fantastic. Some of the earliest stereo recordings were what was then the Minneapolis Symphony, when Bernie Edelstein was principal there. They were recording of Petrushka and
Oh yeah, is
some
that
other
the karate
other stuff. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Those Dorado recordings were fantastic. Um, yeah, my mother was a big fan of Toscanini, so we had lots and lots of Toscanini recordings around, which meant a lot of NBC Symphony, which would have been
Harry Glantz, right?
who?
Harry Glantz, right?
Yeah, Eric Lance, and then New York Philharmonic. Yeah, by the time that Facciano was there,
Right.
so I was just listening to all of them, and of course there were some Chicago recordings there as well. I didn't have anybody in the early days, certainly until I got to college, who was saying, "Oh, you got to listen to Bud Hearses, and this is what you want to do." But I was kind of synthesizing it all the time. I was just listening, and then I would listen to myself, and what do I want it to sound like? And I heard things that I really liked, and I heard on recordings with these great players and great orchestras and great conductors. I heard things from an early age that I didn't like either, that I thought could be done better.
Yeah.
I also started collecting scores by the time I was in high school, because I think it's really important to know what is there. I mean, we like to think that, especially first trumpet, this is the most important voice in the entire orchestra. Well, sometimes, but not as much as we'd like to think. A lot of times and you have to fit in. You have to find, again, there's balance. There's times Tom Stevens described it as, you got to know when to play out, and you need to know when to play in.
Right.
And there are certainly times when the highest musical goal for the moment is to be just really a part of the ensemble. And so I was interested in doing that. And I was also always curious about, what do I really sound like in a big hall? Here I am behind the bell. I'm back here with a mouthpiece. How do I know what I sound like? And it took me a while to realize, oh, when you go into a big room, put your ears out on the far wall. and it helps if you look there as well. And then over the years of teaching and playing, it became my belief, the one way I approach things is like, when you look at something, you can stare at something at a distance, like at the far wall, but you can also, with your peripheral vision, you can be aware of the walls around you and the ceiling and, things on the wall or light fixtures and stuff like that. I think that our sound tends to expand to fill the space of which you are visually aware. So why I always encourage people to practice in big rooms is, you want to have a big sound, play in a big room and put your eyes, look on the back wall, and that helps you direct your attention there, so that that's where you're listening. Because really nobody cares what it sounds like at your bell.
Right.
The only time when that ever makes a difference is if you're in a studio situation, you're playing just to a mic that's 4 inches away or 2 feet above the bell or something. Nobody cares what you play. They care what they hear.
Right.
So the way to understand what the audience is going to hear is to practice putting your ears out into the audience. And that also helps you develop a concept of what is my role at any moment in the ensemble. And am I really the leading voice? Am I joining in with something here? Is it really time for me to just blend? I'm just another voice, like another note that somebody plays on the organ. You put all the fingers down on the right keys, hopefully, and they all blend. And
Yeah.
Puts them together. Yeah. So
that was a
stuff
pretty
like
early
that.
age to start to be aware enough to study scores, though, that to be doing that in high school is pretty.
Well, I probably one of the things that I most enjoyed was when I heard Rite of Spring, and then got a peek at a score probably in the library first. It's like, oh, this is just unbelievable. I got to do this. And the Indianapolis Public Library had a pretty substantial music collection. And usually every weekend I was in that library and I was hauling home as many recordings and scores as I could get my hands on, as they'd let me check out. There was some limit, but I listened to all kinds of stuff.
Wow.
Yeah. And score reading was really important. I remember the first time listening to we had a Stokowski recording of Scheherazade. And by that time, I was pretty fluent in reading music, and following along a score. Some of his rubato was so crazy. It's like, wait a minute, the rhythm isn't that complicated. I'm having trouble keeping up. How does he do that? No, but it was a real, that was an important part of my education, for sure. And I went after it. That I wasn't waiting for somebody to tell me, oh, you should look at a score and understand it was just seemed like second nature to me. You want to know about something. Same thing about acoustics. I could never understand why people could try to have a career as a musician and not make some kind of, at least a cursory study of acoustics. Sound is the stuff of our art form. And it obviously, we get different sounds in different rooms. It sounds one thing if you're practicing in a completely dead little kind of telephone booth practice room where it's really dead, or you go in the stairwell and you can play arpeggio and listen to all of it simultaneously because you've got so much echo going on. Yeah, and yet it doesn't seem ever to be a regular part of study for musicians, and I don't understand why not. I made it my business I have easily half a dozen books on acoustics, some specifically musical acoustic and some just about sound.
Wow.
Yeah, reflectivity, absorptive qualities and all that kind of stuff. Makes a difference. Any good orchestral musician is going to tell you when they play in more than one room, they need to adjust. When orchestras go on tour, which I did a lot. I played a lot of different places, both with the Israel Philharmonic and Utah, that there are times that, wow, where we're sitting in this hall and the sound is like really booming out here, we got to back off. And other times it's like, oh man, it's really hard to feel like you have any presence at all.
Yeah.
But that's part of the job.
I'm going to warm up in a different space tomorrow now that we're talking about this.
Yeah.
Well, talk about the next part of your education, which of course be being a student at Indiana and studies there.
Herb Mueller was my first teacher. He had been principal trumpet at Kansas City Philharmonic, and he played with the Ballet Russe that years ago had tours that they went through the States, and he was a real dour looking kind of guy, but he had a really good sense of humor. He was a very kind, gentle man and very thoughtful and very, very methodical. When he worked on, like if he was going to play Handel or Bach, he said that his approach was he'd first play it through as written on B flat trumpet, not transposing, but he'd play it at the key and get his phrasing together and his breathing and the articulation the way he wanted. Then he would go to like C trumpet or maybe jump to D or something, a smaller trumpet. But yeah, so that was who he was. He's also the guy that got me working in the Schubrück collection of books that I have for years counted as one of my like four legs of a table of just the fundamentals of materials. I would say Clark for sure, Schlossberg, the Schubrück, and I think for me Caffarelli actually, because they're so melodic and they cover the transposition and you got to your articulations and just really play musically to do those things as well. And I always told students, you know, I'm assigning these 3 etudes for you for your next lesson. Do not treat this as just an exercise of getting the right notes with your transposition. That's a given. You have to do that. But this is about making music and playing expressively.
Yeah.
So the Schuberg I got from Mueller. What I also got from Mueller was at the end of my freshman year, an embouchure change, which he said, Ed, I've been watching and listening to you all year. And I was in an orchestra as a freshman, you know, which was unusual then and now.
Right.
And I enjoyed that, but after a year of playing there, he looked, and I was playing, I mean, even if you haven't played a brass instrument, you look at the thing as round and it goes on your mouth, you would figure that, okay, well, you probably want to put it like somewhere in the center. And I probably had started out that way, but in junior high, I got braces on my teeth. And my mother told me later, if she'd known the agony it was going to put me through, she wasn't sure she would have made me do that. But I had to put beeswax over those things. And it was in the days when it was a lot of metal work, you know, it was just horrible. Without the beeswax or something, it just, to try to play trumpet, it just made hamburger out of the inside of my lips. It was terrible. And to adjust with that and compensate, I ended up playing with the mouthpiece was centered way over to the side and using just a sliver of my upper lip. So this talk with Mueller, he's saying, Ed, you know, I think you're at a point now where you soon will be, where physically it's just going to be impossible for you to progress. And, you know, cold sweats, going, oh no, what's next? And he said, I think we ought to change. I think we ought to get you playing in the center. And he says there are 2 ways that we could do that. One is we just stop and you don't play for a time, and then we put it in the middle and you just like start over. So that will really be like starting over. It's going to feel like nothing's working here. And we depend on a lot of coordination of all the muscles between what goes around and all the ones that pull all the different directions. And there's that balance of the tension and flexibility that we have to play. Said, oh, or we could move it just little bit by little bit, gradually, and you'll still be able to play, but it's going to take a long time and it'll never be quite right. And he looks at me and says, what do you think? I'm going, I don't know. I never did this. You're the teacher, and I trusted him implicitly. I said, what you tell me, what do I need to do? And he says, I think we should just take it off and put it in the center. So fortunately, you know, being able to be at home in Indianapolis, an hour's drive away, I was able to drive down here to Bloomington once a week and have lessons. I don't even remember if I was actually enrolled in summer school or what, but I remember pretty regularly coming down here, and he gave me some book to, you know, that was out of the mainstream, just of, you know, trying to keep my interest up and keep me focused. And I didn't do very well with it. The end of the summer, I still, like, I couldn't play out of the staff, and it was very frustrating. And then he announced that he was leaving. So that's when he went to Ithaca. And I don't know what prompted all that, but anyway, he was going. And so my teacher that I liked was gone. There were 2 other faculty members. There was Bill Adam, who you know very well, and Lou Davidson. And since Davidson had been principal trumpet of the Cleveland Orchestra, and I really was thinking about orchestral playing, that's the way I was leaning. Plus the fact that the people that I knew studied with Bill Adams, there were a bunch of them that were the strongest players. They could play faster, higher, louder than anybody. And they obviously had a lot of stuff put together. But there were some others that were struggling and ended up playing baritone in the band. And I was just afraid to go study with him for that. I figure with my luck, I'm going to be, you know, playing in the band. Yeah, this isn't going to work. So I went to study with Davidson. Well, I'd say Davidson was my teacher because he was such a naturally gifted player. He didn't know what to do with me. the next year, my sophomore year, he's assigning me etudes that were really much too difficult for me. And I think he thought that I was a bad student because I'd come in week after week and I really couldn't play it. And he was not the person to give me guidance about, here, physically, you need to do this, play these kind of exercises. If he'd said, you know, you need to be going at this real slowly and methodically, and, you know, 5 minutes of this, 10 minutes of that every day, and then leave it and come back to it, something, but he didn't. And then, you know, one of the lessons I learned from him is that with students, like with your children, they tend to rise or sink according to the expectations that we put on them. And after a while, I think Davidson did not expect that I was a good student, and I became really a poor student. And so my entire sophomore year at IU really was a disaster. I mean, that was bad enough. I mean, musically, I couldn't play. And of course, that did a lot for my attitude not being great. I ended up playing third cornet in one of the bands, which I really resented. I got dumped by my girlfriend, which didn't help. And it was the 60s, so, you know, life was changing anyway.
Yeah.
And it was finally the next summer after my sophomore year. I had a job driving a pickup truck for a place that repaired electric motors. And I was trying to do a little playing. And finally, one day, I heard what was coming out of the horn, and I just about quit. I thought, this is not working. And I'm thinking, yeah, this fall I'm going to be a junior at IU. It's IU. There's going to be freshmen coming in that are going to play circles around. Okay, I should quit. It's I don't know what to do. And I started thinking. I was pretty good at math, and I really liked ships and planes and stuff. And University of Michigan has a great nautical engineering program. So maybe I ought to do that. And sort of as soon as I really looked at the possibility of doing something else, I heard finally the voice inside that, nah, no, I have to play. I have to play. I don't know how I'm going to do this. And I didn't. I really didn't. I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I have to do this. I'm going to do it. I just have to play. That's part of who I am. Right. I mean, it is who I am. It's from experiences like that I've told students for a long time, you know, being a musician is not a job that you have. It's a life that you live, because it's just all encompassing. I had a friend who taught, a terrific horn player, was in the Dayton Philharmonic and taught over there. And he would try to discourage students at the beginning of the year. And he would say, you know, if you can imagine yourself doing something else, you should probably go do it. But if you can't, it's like, this is really who you are. And people talk about being chosen by music. I didn't choose my profession, it chose me. Well, okay, maybe, but you know, that was it. So I started, and I did play just little bits of Schlossberg, because in thinking about how on earth am I going to get this together? So, well, okay, fortunately, it's the kind of instrument you only have to play one note at a time. It's not like piano or organ, you know, you got all the digits, and with organ, you got your feet going to. It's like, well, that's too complicated. All I got to play is one note at a time. And all that I can expect, or anybody else can expect me to do, is the best I can possibly do right now, right here on that one note. If I haven't lost my ears just because I can't play trumpet very well at this moment. I know all the stuff that I already know about music. I listen. I have good sense of time. I really worked on time, because I just love that aspect of playing from a very early age. I taught myself to tap 2-3 and, you know, pick a tempo that was exactly 60 beats a minute and all kinds of stuff. So, okay, all I got to do is play one note at a time, and it's got to get better. It will get better. I had to trust the process, which I did. And it just has to go like that. And if I can play one note beautifully, then I can get another note. You play a G in the staff, you push the second valve down, you go to an F sharp. That's a given. You know, that's not harder. I can do that. And gradually I will get it going somehow. And that's what I did. I didn't have any help. I didn't have anybody guiding me. I just did one foot in front of the other all through that summer. And then when school started in the fall and they had placement auditions for ensemble, I got first chair in what was then considered the second orchestra. So I came out of all the trumpets. I was like second in the school.
Wow.
So I felt good, like well, okay, that worked.
Yeah.
I accomplished something. And I had reason to have faith in myself. And the lesson that, I got from Max Woodbury saying, no, you're not going to be the principal trumpet, was like, okay, now I have an idea of what it might take. I was still a long, long way from being professional caliber player, but that door was opening in front of me. I could see that. And so I played, and then I was also playing in jazz ensemble. I played, let's see, did I start that year? No, I started the next year, I think. Yeah, I started the next year. So I just, I did that year with Davison, and, he was great to be around because he played in the Cleveland Orchestra with George Zell. And so when he did an orchestra rep class, it was like, yeah, really, listen, get this. And so that part was really valuable. But as far as helping me get my trumpet playing together, not so good. So it took them a year then to find a replacement for Mueller. And that's when Charlie Gorham came, who had taught at Baldwin Wallace and what's the other school over by Cleveland?
Oberlin.
No, yeah, Oberlin is there, but no, he taught at another one. Anyway, Baldwin Wallace, Gorham came. And so I met him because the orchestra I was in was playing some Handel piece, and there was a place in the direction of the opera, it just said trumpet flourish, and okay, what do we do with this? I don't know. And I asked Davidson, he said, well, why don't you go ask the new guy, go ask Gorham, because Charlie had really made a study. He was very, very knowledgeable about Baroque music and styles and all that kind of stuff, and he had no problem coming up with some little 15-second 2-trumpet fanfare kind of thing in the style of Handel, so we could play for the opera, and the conductor was happy and we were happy. So that's how I met Gorham. And then it partly because I was such a slow, bad student as a sophomore, it took me 5 years to get my degree.
Nothing wrong with that.
So, so then I studied with Gorham for the last 2 years that I was in school. And once again, he was more like Max in a way that it was really, there was a thoroughgoing kind of approach. And he did have things that he taught about, that were more of a technical nature, a lot of which I didn't actually agree with. But as far as the material that he was having me play and the way he had me approach things, musically, it was fantastic. And he and I hit it off really well. And I enjoyed working with him. Yeah. I should maybe, just as a brief sidelight too, when I started at IU, I was a music education major, which was fine. I mean, it was in an orchestra and it was all that, but I was not strong academically and I really didn't want to do that stuff. And by the time I really decided to play, so the fools allowed me to change my major to performance right at the time when I couldn't play. But I did eventually get Bachelor of Music degree in trumpet performance from IU.
Yeah, and but that's but those lessons that you talk about when you're down and it's a difficult experience and you dig your way out. I mean, those are really valuable when you can learn them when the job's not on the line, right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, you want to do that for sure, because it does get harder. And I've told the students that a lot of times. As much as you get all worked up about this concert that you're playing, keep in mind that part of it is because you're rehearsing this 2-3 pieces that you're going to play on this orchestra concert, and you start working on that a month ahead of time. and you have all these rehearsals, and then you have one shot at it. So yeah, it's a big deal, but you know, if you screw up, it's not your career. It's not your professional reputation on the line. You're not trying to support a family at this point, what you're doing. So whatever stress you feel with this, find a good, healthy way to adapt to it and work with it, because you can trust me on this, it's going to get more difficult later on when it feels like there's much more on the line. Yeah. So that was all good. But fortunately, I got to have a lot of experiences. I got to go to the what was then the Colorado Philharmonic, that's since become the National Repertory Orchestra.
Yep.
In Colorado. Had a great time. One of my colleagues there was Don Harry, who's been tuba player in the Buffalo Philharmonic for the last God knows how many years. He also was here at IU. And the trumpet section was Dave Hickman and me and somebody else that I'm sure you know now, because she's married to Mike Chikowitz. Carol?
Yeah, Carol. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. She was Carol Warner in those days. And she, so we were in the section Colorado. In fact, we were together the next summer at the Music Academy of the West. She was also there.
So let's talk about that a little bit, because you were studying with Stevens, and this would have been at
Yeah.
Academy of the West. Tom Stevens, for people that didn't catch my last name reference. About what year would this have been?
1972.
1972.
I did Colorado in 71. Was hoping to go back. I'd done a little bit of conducting, and when I auditioned, I played the Brandenburg at 9 o'clock in the morning for Walter Charles, who was the conductor of the Colorado Philharmonic then. And then all my friends were getting contracts, and I didn't get one. I said, well, I finally called him up. What's going on? He said, well, you played a very fine audition, but we just couldn't work for to have somebody in the trumpet section be an assistant conductor. And I said, I didn't make it a stipulation. I just said I wanted to be considered if there's something I did. Oh, well, sorry. In any case, I hired somebody else. So I started that summer. I didn't have anything to do. I mean, now we're summer of 72, and I had finished my studies at IU. And I went with Gorham. Gorham and his family and another family had a cabin up in Canada on a beautiful lake. And we were up there and we were working on building a sauna. We'd gone to an island and cut down some trees, and I made a rustic ladder out of the tree with the bark, tying the rungs and all this kind of stuff. We happened to be at the marina one day, which was the only phone. It was a half hour by boat away from their camp. And at that minute, the phone rings and one comes out. Charlie, it's a phone call for you. And he goes in, a couple of minutes later, comes back out, says, Ed, it's Jim Snap. He wants to talk to you. So this was another one of his students. Jim had gone to Interlochen, and he knew a guy named Jim Thompson. You probably know this name. And Jim needed a second trumpet player for the New College Festival in Sarasota, Florida. And Snap was going through a bunch of stuff and he couldn't do it, but he said, hey, my friend is here and he'd be delighted to play. So at the beginning of summer, I had nothing to do. Then suddenly I had to cut short the trip to Canada so I could get home and then get down to Sarasota, Florida, and play with Jim Thompson in a brass quintet and also play some orchestra pieces. And coincidentally, that summer, another trumpet player named you might not know at this point, Marshall Kaufman, who was one of Davidson's students, very talented, woman from Texas, had tied for second in the Munich International Competition. Part of the job was a job with the Munich Symphony, not the Munich Philharmonic or the radio orchestra, but anyway. And if she was going to take it, she could not take her scholarship and go to the Music Academy of the West. So poof, there's an opening. And Louis Van Haney, who had played trombone in the New York Philharmonic with Bernstein and was on the faculty at IU, also taught at the Music Academy of the West, he says, I know somebody else at Indiana who would be good for the trumpet section of the Music Academy for the summer program. And they needed 5. We were doing Scriabin Poem of Ecstasy big Gershwin program and a whole bunch of stuff. So suddenly, from not having anything for the summer, I did this nifty little 3-week thing in Sarasota. I played with great musicians, and then boom, I get to go to California, and the Music Academy of the West is a spectacular place to play, and it's a fantastic venue for somebody on the cusp of their career. And not least of which was, well, there were two things that really then that summer determined the course of my career, because the music director there and of the Utah Symphony was a man named Maurice Abravanel. And the man teaching trumpet then was Thomas Stevens, who was principal trumpet of the Los Angeles Philharmonic. So I got to work with Tom. I played all these concerts with Abravanel. And at the end of it, Abravanel appreciated my work. He gave me the Music Director's Award, of which there was one for the student for the summer. So that felt good. And I got to play first on the Scriabin Poem of Ecstasy. I played first on the Gershwin Concerto in F. I played the bicycle horns on American in Paris. And we did Shostakovich 5. I mean, all of which showed Abravanel that I was really serious and I wanted to work. And I really appreciated that time. And I wrote him a letter thanking him about that. Stevens was a fantastic teacher for me at the time because he really challenged me. And his detailed sense of paying attention to everything that is on the page. There's a reason for that mark and why this quarter note looks different than this quarter note. And you have to make a sound difference. When a composer intends something different, you have to make an audible difference, not just in your own mechanics of playing, but a difference for the audience, which took me back to the score study. So yeah, it was that kind of work that was really, really inspiring.
Did he introduce you to stamp at that time too?
No, he didn't. Actually, that came about from another friend of mine, a guy named Dave Sirfos, who's been principal trumpet of the Pasadena Symphony, who played extra with the LA Phil and a lot of those Southern California orchestras for years. He was part of the section. Bert Truax, Carol, I mentioned, Chuck Lorette, who was in the Buffalo Philharmonic for years, or Pittsburgh then.
Pittsburgh now,
yeah, Pittsburgh. So, I mean, we had a pretty good trumpet section of five players. We got by all right. No, I didn't meet Stamp. I had a lesson with Stamp the next summer when I came back. Because Dave Sirfos, who was one of my friends in that trumpet section, in the meantime, during the first year that I was in Israel, Dave had lessons with Jimmy Stamp and said, man, he showed me some stuff and we played some of his exercises and he said, we got to get you down there, and that was fantastic. But as far as Stevens was concerned, one thing he threw on the stand in a lesson was the Robert Henderson Variations. Do you know this piece?
Oh yeah.
It's unaccompanied, and he put up the last movement, which is a 3-part fugue, and I'm looking, what, you're going to play? Somebody else is coming in. We're going to play that. And he said, no, it's solo. There's 3 lines of music, and one person has to play all of them. There are different kinds of articulations, different stuff. I mean, it's incredibly complex. So he said, play that. So I started playing it, reading it, and I got along some point. I don't know how many bars into it I got, before I just completely melted down. I couldn't, my brain is not handling this. And as I finished, he's looking at me going, well, I got farther than anybody else so far.
For anybody who doesn't know that piece, there's a great recording of Stevens playing that.
Oh yeah. Well, it's fantastic. Robert Henderson, by the way, then years later was the associate conductor of the Utah Symphony. So I got to work with him. He was a pretty fair horn player, I think, but he was really a very fine conductor. In fact, one of the finest performances of the Utah Symphony that I remember was playing the Schumann Rhenish with Bob Henderson conducting. It was thrilling, and everything came together with that. I was doing, I can't think of the name of the Ato book now, but it was Frieza. Frieza. Did you ever come across that?
Oh, yeah,
It's
the
got
eight tone weights, right?
really, yeah, and they're really complex rhythmic things. And I was working on one of those for each lesson. And at one point he's going, who's teaching this stuff at Indiana? And I said, well, I studied with Charlie Gorham. We've been kind of adventurous, but basically I'm figuring this out. This is like what I do. This is part of how I've always taken these things, because no matter how weird the music is or how unfamiliar, there's still, the notation is there. You got to just figure it out. It's our job.
Right.
Hey, Travis. Yeah. So anyway, that was great. It was really inspiring.
Yeah.
So then I was, I'll go ahead and just jump to the next step. Because Tom figures importantly in this. I was back at IU then for the 6th fall in a row, and I was riding my bike and playing chess and practicing, basically playing and hanging out. I was enrolled because I finally won the audition, and I was principal trumpet of the IU Philharmonic. So I had that, but it didn't last long, because on a Sunday evening in October, the phone rings and say, hello. Hey, this is Tom Stevens. Well, hi, how are you? Fine. Listen, Zubin needs a first trumpet player in Israel. Are you interested? I was almost sick to my stomach. It was like my life is, I'm not in physical danger, but my life is flashing before me at that moment. Everything is changing. This is not at all anything I could have possibly anticipated. So I said, well, sure, yeah. So he said, okay, listen, he's expecting to hear from you. So here's his number. You got a pencil? So I get a pencil, I write down Zubin Mehta's phone number. And he said, call him and tell him he can't be here before Wednesday. This was a Sunday. Tell him he can't be here before Wednesday, but then get on the first plane out here. And well, he wants to hear you. So, okay. So my folks had a friend, this was pre-internet, of course, and pre-cell phone and everything. My folks had a friend who was a travel agent, and they got me on a flight to Los Angeles. The next day, I threw trumpets and music and clothes in the car and drove up to Indianapolis, and then flew to LA the next day. And Tom Stevens met me at the airport, and I stayed at his house, and he coached me a little bit. We didn't really like have lessons and stuff, but we went over some things, and he, I had some questions, and he had some guidance. He said, well, when you go sit on stage, don't point straight out in the hall, point across the hall. Okay, point across the stage. Okay. Zubin doesn't like to have trumpet sound boom right at his face. It's not good. He's not okay with that. So, okay. So Wednesday comes, and we go down to the music center where the LA Phil played then, and I played most of the stuff that I knew over the course of like a half hour and 40 minutes for Zubin. And he came up to the stage and said, listen, I got an appointment upstairs. I have to go. There's an interview for the TV or something. And when I come back down, I want you to play the blah, 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 blah. Oh, great. This wasn't enough. Well, he either forgot or he decided, I heard enough. And he called Tom and I into his room, and he starts talking. And I suddenly realized, holy crap, I've got a job. He started talking about me going to Israel. So he wrote me a check for my round trip airfare for my audition, and said, how soon can you get there? And I said, well, I got to get a passport for one thing, I'm sure. And I had this concert and stuff. So I finished up with a lot of help between Charlie Gorham finding subs for me and taking care of stuff on that end, and my parents. And somehow we expedited a passport, because 2 weeks later I was in Tel Aviv. So, and I went to a concert where they had a series called Light Classical Music, and it wasn't really pops, but they did, I forget what it was, Spanish tunes or something or other. It was really nice. And I'm sitting there in the audience looking down there with the trumpet section going, this is my orchestra. This is where I'm playing. I was 23 and it was like, hello world.
Yeah, exactly.
What's next?
What was the first concert you did with Zubin?
The first concert with Zubin. Oh, geez. I don't remember. I have no idea. Zubin, while he was, I think his title was not quite music director then, but he was something else. He really became music director later. You can say he was music director because basically, I mean, he was the top conductor, but the orchestra did most of its season with guest conductors. Zubin was there for like 8, 10, 12 weeks out of the year. And that was it. So I was there for a while before I ever played with Zubin. I think the first concert I played was with Jean Martinon, who had been music director of the Chicago Symphony. And we did this cool piece by Albert Roussel, Bacchus and Ariadne. And Martineau had this habit of when he wanted attention in a rehearsal, they had to make some notes to people. You know, they usually tap on the stand or something. He made this kissing sound, so he'd go like, you know, like come. And he's doing this, and we hadn't even got to the first break in my first rehearsal, and about the third or fourth time he's doing that, I'm hearing from back of the second violins, and somebody in the in the woodwinds is going. I go, oh man, where am I? What's happening with this? So, but that was a great education. I always referred to my 4 years as principal in the Israel Philharmonic as being my graduate degrees.
Yeah, I would say
people, I taught for 30 years at IU, and people would say, well, where'd you get your doctorate, or I'm lucky to have a bachelor's degree. I don't know. I don't have that part of it. I got my education living my career.
What was Tom's reaction when you won the job, when you were in the office?
Oh, he was fantastic, and I couldn't thank him enough. I remember being at the airport when he dropped me off. I said, I'll never be able to repay you for this. I don't know how to thank you. He said, just go do the job so that Zubin might ask me again and we can help somebody else out. Yeah. And I've told all of that story about him putting me up and all that kind of stuff, you know, to lots of people. And I said, Tom Stevens? This is not the Tom Stevens I know, because he didn't have a reputation as being the most genteel, kind-hearted kind of guy. He could be pretty cold and hard at times. But, you know, with me, he was a sweetheart. It was just fantastic. I really enjoyed it. And what an inspiration. He's a fantastic player.
Could you talk a little bit about the Israel Philharmonic? Because I don't think everybody knows sort of the history of that orchestra and some of the people you were around in that orchestra.
Yeah, it was founded by a man named Bronislaw Huberman, who was a fantastic violinist. And he, once the Nazis came to power in Germany in 1933, he saw the handwriting on the wall. There had been for decades before this Zionist movement, and there were people, you know, around the world, Judaism, who wanted to establish a homeland in, you know, what Christians usually refer to as the Holy Land. Well, it's holy for Jewish people too, and Muslims. He recruited. He consciously recruited. He made trips back and forth between what was then Palestine, because it was part of the British protectorate after World War I. He made trips between there and various countries in Europe auditioning people. There's a fantastic movie called An Orchestra of Exiles that, if you're curious about this, it's really quite a fantastic story, and not just for people who are, you know, orchestral musicians, just about history and culture and life in the 20th century. And a lot of those people then who joined him, their lives were saved. In fact, there was a story of one person, I don't remember the details, but who came, you know, and life was pretty rough in the desert of what there was in what was then Palestine, was now Israel. I mean, it's desert, basically a desert country. And the person went back to Germany or Poland or wherever they were from, and they were killed. They and their family lost their lives in the Holocaust in the camps. So Huberman recruited all these people, and the orchestra was founded in 1936 as the Palestine Philharmonic. And and then on the, in fact, I think Toscanini I think Toscanini had a role in that and was maybe one of the first conductors, not the first. And then with the Declaration of the State of Israel in 1948, it became the Israel Philharmonic Orchestra. In fact, there's another local tie-in between here and there, because the first guest conductor of the Israel Philharmonic, just after Israel had been declared a state, was a man named Eisler Solomon, who for many years was the music director of the Indianapolis Symphony. So Eisler Solomon had Israeli visa #1.
Wow.
Yeah. It's kind of a strange connection. You wouldn't think Indianapolis and Israel. Yeah, but hey, yeah. It happened. Yeah, so there was that. A funny personal story that kind of took me back into that old time. When I joined that orchestra in the fall of 1972, there were still some of the original members of the orchestra there. And there were several members of the orchestra who were Holocaust survivors. There were people that had tattoos on their forearm. We had one tour to South Africa, and before the concert, we were in Port Elizabeth. And before the concert, my friend, the tuba player, and I were standing outside. It was really nice weather. And a short, very, very British-looking guy with a little trim, British-style mustache comes up, says, "Excuse me, gentlemen, you're with the orchestra. We're wearing tails." Yeah, so like, uh-huh. And he said, "I wonder if there's a man named Horst Solomon would happen to be playing the concert tonight." I went, "Yeah, sure." And he said, "Oh, I'd very much like to see him." So my friend, Matt Garbett, was the tuba player. Then he said, "I'll go get him." So he went inside to get Horst. When he come out, this guy pulls out of his pocket a program. He had been serving in the British 8th Army in Egypt in 1938 and heard a concert of the Palestine Philharmonic, of which they played a Mozart horn concerto with Horst Solomon as the soloist. And here this is like 34 years later, something like that. Yeah, 6 years later. Yeah, it was fantastic. So there was, one of the greatest things about that orchestra for me personally and my growth of a musician was also that I was playing, there were 10 or 12 Americans in the orchestra, but basically it was a European trained orchestra. So I was playing with all these people who came from long traditions in Germany and Austria and Poland and England, in France, just Italy, fantastic playing. And backstage, during the break, you'd hear, in a span of 3 minutes, you'd hear 6 different languages, people are talking, and it was really fantastic. Plus we played with, all the greatest soloists, Isaac Stern, Zach Perlman, Zuckerman, I mentioned Arthur Rubinstein,
right?
All these fantastic people. It was such an education, and great conductors, Claudio Abbado, Raphael Kubelik, Leonard Bernstein, Mehta, and it just went on and on and on. And everybody said I joined the orchestra the wrong year. What are you talking about? Well, there wasn't any international tour that year, but in the following 3 seasons, we did, I think it was 5 tours. We came to the States once. We did this tour to South Africa where we're all over the place. We did one that hit like European capitals. We did one that was all in England. We did one that was, really extensive, like 6-week European tour. And yeah, it was just amazing. And another thing that was really helpful for me learning the repertoire and in my development was there was such a demand for tickets to concerts of the Israel Philharmonic. Not only did they play to sellout audiences, they sold it out 6, 7, 8 times. And so we would play the same program night after night after night, different audiences playing the same program. And that, what a fantastic way to learn the repertoire. You know, if you get something right the next, you know, then the next night, and you feel good about it, then the next night you go, okay, great, I can now I can enjoy this a little more. And it's like, I know how this goes. I got it. That feels good. It's great to play that. And if you screw something up, you go, okay, I get another shot tomorrow.
Right.
Of course, if it's really problematic and scary, then it's like, oh my God, I have to do this 5 more times. Yeah.
Can you talk about some of those conductors you just mentioned? Because I mean, those are the biggest names of the 20th century as far as music directors or conductors.
Yeah. Well, one of the great highlights, if somebody asked me to, like, 5 favorite concerts that you participated in, one would certainly be playing Bruckner 7 with Claudio Abbado. And just the opening theme with that soaring cello line. I remember hearing that, and just my jaw was on the floor. I'm going, I know these people. They don't sound that good. I mean, they always sounded good, but it was miraculous. It was fantastic. And I'm looking at Obata going, what the hell did he do? How did he make that happen? It was just incredible. Some of those guys that really at the very top, there's a kind of charisma, there's a vibe, there's a special energy that just, it's really not what you usually see. It was very, very special. And I treasured that. When I knew Bernstein was coming, I asked the guy that was principal cellist, I think this was the first year I was there. I said, how was it working with Bernstein? He said, oh, it's great. No. I said, well, like, I'd played with Zubin by that time. I said, what's the difference between, like, Mehta and Bernstein when you're playing? And he thought a second, he said, I'll tell you. You know, when Bernstein is conducting and he sweats blood. It's like, you know, he gives everything. It's all there. When Zubin's conducting and he sweats, it's perspiration. Yeah.
What about Kubelik, though? That's another name.
Who?
You mentioned Kubelik, right?
Oh yeah, Raphael Kubelik. Oh, he was amazing. He was amazing. We did one of the, you know, I'm really proud of the fact that I have a lot of recordings, both Israel, but even especially with Utah Symphony. So many recordings we did that, you know, our art form is really transient. You know, if you sound like $1 million last night, or you really screwed something up badly, it's gone. It's done. It doesn't exist anymore, except on recording. You know, you can always play a recording and go, that day I sounded like that. I did that. So with Kubelik, we were one of the 9 orchestras that was part of a recording project of the 9 Beethoven symphonies that he did, each one with a different orchestra on Deutsche Grammophon. So we recorded Beethoven 4 with him, which was wonderful, and it was very cool. It was inspiring. We recorded in Munich, in fact, at the, I don't remember the name of the hall, but you know, what am I thinking of? Oh, the Bavarian Radio Orchestra was his orchestra. And that's where, you know, that's Munich, and that's where they did the recordings. We also did, on one of the highlights, in Israel, we didn't ever do this on tour record, we did Mahler 4 with him. And he was so enchanted with the score, which he had conducted this piece so much, and he knew all of it by heart. And you could just see him sometimes looking at the score, and it's like he's still astonished that somebody put those marks on a page, and this stuff comes out, this music. In the first movement, you know, there's all this, and there's little solos and stuff. And he described this one day in the rehearsal. He said, this is like all these little dramas going on the forest floor. And then the trumpet comes in, and it's the voice of God saying, but everything is all right in the world. And I remember looking at like, okay, I'm supposed to play now.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, yeah. So that was really inspiring. Zubin, I always thought, Zubin's a fantastic conductor. I got to give him credit for what he's done, and some of his stuff he does as well, if not better than anybody. I always thought that he would have been the greatest opera conductor of the 20th century into the 21st. He's so facile. He is such a fantastic accompanist. His beat is clear, and in that regard, he's really easy to play with. And he's dramatic. With Bach, forget it. He really doesn't. He doesn't relate to that music very well. But things are really big. Verdi, incredible. We did the Schoenberg Girl Eater, this enormous piece. Jesse Norman was, speaking of enormous, Jesse Norman was the soloist, and it's got like, I forget what we had, 6 trumpets, and there are like 5 trombones, including contrabass trombone, and there's 20 percussionists playing everything from snare drum and triangle to chains and all kinds of stuff. So that was a big deal. Well, anyway, he was really good with a certain repertoire, and he was very, like I said, very dramatic. And it was big climaxes and real hushed, kind of quiet, dramatic moments. But Bernstein was fantastic. There's a recording and I think there's a video of Brahms' Third Symphony as well. I know we recorded that with Bernstein, but there is a video that you can find pretty readily on YouTube of Leonard Bernstein, Brahms Symphony No. 1, Israel Philharmonic Orchestra. BJ took a clip of this and played it at my retirement party last summer. It was good to see. That was really fascinating. When I hadn't seen it for years and I was watching that and I'm looking at Lenny's motions, I'm going, how did we play with that? It's really, yeah, but we did, and the orchestra sounds really good. So that was thrilling.
You mentioned the orchestra going to Germany and recording.
Yeah.
What was that like for the Israel Philharmonic with the history you just mentioned, going back to Germany?
Well, it was interesting. I think most of the people were were far enough away from it that it was like that was okay. We did a tour. The first tour I did with the orchestra was one put together hastily after the Yom Kippur War in 1973, and we ended up in Bonn, Germany, and we're playing a concert and had a recording session there. And there was, and Zubin made a speech to everybody like, if anybody is not comfortable with this and would like to be excused from the concert, there's no question they should be excused without any penalty. They shouldn't be docked their pay or anything. They should just say, I'm not comfortable doing this. And there was one cellist who said, yeah, I'm not doing this. But you live in Israel, and even in that time, there were Mercedes taxis and stuff like that. So but it was kind of strange. Yeah. In fact, just when I joined the orchestra in '72, the orchestra had been on a tour of North and South America, and I saw video from film. I think they were in Argentina, maybe, when they got word of the massacre of the Israeli athletes at the Munich Olympics in 1972. And they were waving the traffic off, and of course they're concerned. It's always a security concern when the orchestra is the cultural ambassador of the country, and it always travels with security. And there are people in the orchestra who are trained to respond if it's necessary. Fortunately, we never had any incident come, but there were some people from like the prime minister's security crew, is like the Secret Service we have here. And so one tour when we were in, I think it was probably the time when we did do the recording there in Munich, I went with my colleagues to Dachau, which is not far from that. And we also toured the site of the Olympics where the Israeli athletes had been massacred. So that was really a heavy situation, heavy time. And particularly at Dachau, where there were so many of my colleagues that had lost family in the Holocaust. And that was just a profound experience that brought all of it. I mean, I knew of that. I'd read William Shirer's book, Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, when I was in 7th grade. So I knew of the history and I knew what was going on. This wasn't a big surprise to me. Yet to be there and know people that have a number tattooed on their forearm and see colleagues that are weeping for their lost family and colleagues, it's it's just deeply affecting.
Wow.
Yeah.
Not your normal orchestra tour.
No, no, not your normal orchestra tour. Yeah, but I always loved that. I love traveling. We had a guy, I'm sure he's retired long since, but there was a guy that played piccolo in the Utah Symphony. And when they announced a tour one time, it was this huge moan. It was like, oh no. I'm thinking, yeah, let's go. And he's going, oh, I hate this. I don't want to go. But the 13 seasons that I was in the Utah Symphony, we went to Europe 3 times. And we did a whole potload of recordings. And that for me was a lot of the very best times there. We had some great concerts too.
Yeah.
Some really fine, outstanding.
How did you get into Utah, and that what was the story with your entry into the Utah Symphony?
Well, I came home one night after a concert in Israel, and I see something down by the door of my flat, which was on the ground floor. And I open up, and it's a telegram. Nobody gets telegrams anymore, I suppose. But a telegram, and it was from a Bravanel who knew me from the music academy, and he offered me a job in the Utah Symphony. It was associate principal, and I think it was like $10,000 or something or other, and had a number of weeks of the season. And this was towards the end of my second season in Israel. And I wrote him right away. I said, thank you so much. This is really kind. I really appreciate this. I'd love to do that. But it's just now that I'm really feeling like I'm settled into this job. I'm here working with my colleagues. We have tours coming up. We have recordings, and thank you so much, but it's not time for me to do this. So that's when he hired Tony Plogue. So Tony then played, not a slouch as a trumpet player. And Tony, being a Southern California guy, Tony had also been in the Music Academy of the West, I think a couple of years before me, and I don't remember if he was there 1 year or 2 or something. So he turned that down. I mean, I turned it down, and Tony took the job. He played there for 2 years. Well, comes the beginning of my 4th season in Israel, which started with another one of those long, like month-long tours in Europe, and we were doing the Berlioz Herald in Italy, Brahms 2, Rite of Spring, Dvorak 7, which, okay, the first time I ever heard Dvorak 7 from beginning to end was when we performed it in Salzburg, in the Salzburg Festival, live on Austrian TV that was being broadcast across Europe on rotary trumpets that we just had recently acquired. So that was a little nerve-wracking. And then we came back to Tel Aviv and started the season with Mahler 5. And I'd gotten sick on the tour, and I didn't play my best all the time. And Zubin was really big on, he wanted every first trumpet player to be like Tom Stevens, just like rock solid, never misses anything, always does the right thing. Although Tom confided in me, one time I heard him rehearse, because the Israel Phil and LA Phil were in New York at the same time. So I went to hear a rehearsal, and they're doing Bruckner 8. And Tom says, how was the balance? And I said, well, actually, to tell you the truth, I use more trumpets. And he's, and that's not just me, the trumpet player, saying this is,
Yeah.
what I really think. And he says, yeah, I figured. But you know how it is. In the rehearsal, we play it the way Zubin wants. In the concert, we play it the way we want. So, so that was another Tom Stevens lesson. So anyway, I was not that guy. And the night before Zubin was leaving, I got word from one of the orchestra staff that he wanted to talk to me in his room after the concert. So I go up and he starts talking about, I decided to get another first trumpet for next year. What? I was stunned. He had not ever said, I'm not happy with this. I'm not satisfied. When we do this, I'd like you to do this and such. And never. And I certainly, starting a fourth season, I was a much better trumpet player than the one that I'd been the first couple of seasons, for sure. And I knew the ropes. I wasn't getting worse. Yeah. But anyway, that was another blow to my ego there. Okay, geez, I was happy to get this first job, but now I've been fired. So, and he said, I wanted to tell you at the beginning of the season so you had time to make plans. And oh, thanks. Now you're my friend. So I did a number of things, contacted people. I got Seiji Ozawa's phone number. I called Seiji Ozawa at one point. He was in Europe. He said, oh, no. We had a nice chat, but he said, I don't have anything that I can help you with. He was leaving San Francisco and going to Boston at that point, I think. And James DePriest, I had a good relationship with. I really liked working with him. But nothing came of that. And I wrote a Bravanel. Well, some time later, actually not very long after, I got a letter in response from a Bravanel. And it was very sweet. It was very kind. And it was saying, basically, I'm sorry, at this time I have nothing to offer, but I'm sure that, given your, how you do, you'll land on your feet and things will be fine. And as far as, because I told him that Zubin fired me, and said, as far as that, with Zubin, it just goes to show that conductors can be funny people sometimes. Yeah, that's hilarious. Yeah. So now what happened was really funny. Actually, I got it kind of out of order, because before I got this letter, I got another telegram, and I got a telegram offering me the job. What had happened was the job in Utah. What had happened was a Bravanel wrote this letter to me and mailed it off. And of course, it took 3, 4, 5 days, whatever. Like the day after he mailed it, Tony went in to see him and said, Maestro, I've decided to pursue my solo and chamber music career. I want to leave the orchestra. This is going to be my last season. So Bravanel wrote this letter saying there's no opening. And then I was like, whoops, wait a minute. Actually, we do have an opening. So I got this telegram. Yeah, that's what it was. I got the telegram first offering me the job. And then it was like the next day for me, or 2 days later, or 3 days later, that I got the letter saying there's no job. And I must have looked at the dates, half a dozen times to convince myself what had actually happened. So then I got in touch with them and said, is this real? Are you done? Yeah. Okay. I said, okay, I'm coming. I'll be there. So that's how I got hired to play in Utah. Yeah.
That's amazing. I mean, what a kooky pre-internet experience that was.
Yeah. It was bizarre.
And then 13 years in Israel. I mean,
in Utah.
I'm sorry. 13 years in Utah. I remember hearing some of these Star Wars recordings you guys did.
Yeah, that was great. The guy that was a producer of that was also the producer on a couple of other film music recordings that we did of music by Eric Wolfgang Korngold. Eric Korngold, like a lot of wonderful Jewish composers, got the hell out of Europe in the 30s. And many of them made their way to the West Coast and had fantastic careers and wrote great music for films.
Especially with
the
puppet, right? Is that?
oh yeah, oh yeah. So Franz Waxman and um, oh, who was the other one I was just thinking of? Anyway, there was a whole bunch of them. So Korngold produced these recordings. He was in the booth for recording sessions for the music that his father had written, and he was also in the booth for our recordings of the music of John Williams from the first 3 Star Wars films.
Wow.
And yeah, that was fantastic. I just loved that. It was really hard.
Yeah.
But it was great. And that's one of those that, you know, especially the, you know, there have been a few like small things, you know, that I've had the opportunity to play that, yeah, I always wanted to play Mahler 1, and I always wanted to play Beethoven 5th and Shostakovich 5 and all those things. But I also always hoped I could play the Fox fanfare. So the opening of the Star Wars, we play, and then it's a beautifully timed wham to start the main title for what was the first Star Wars movie. It's like, what is it, chapter 4? Yeah.
Yeah. Before things went south.
Yeah. Yeah. So what we did was 4, 5, 6
Right.
sequence. Some excerpts. The march, the Imperial March, was just really a kick in the head. That was a lot of stuff that was fun to do.
Yeah.
We recorded also with Kojin. We did Berlioz Symphony Fantastique, and there's a funny story about the cornet obligato with that. You know that one, Travis? Yeah, I had heard that when the LA Phil played Symphony Fantastique, that Tom Stevens played this cornet obligato in the ball movement. I said, what the hell are you talking about? And then when it came time that we were going to be performing it and recording it, I went to Kojin and I said, are we going to do the cornet solo in the ball movement? And he, of course, had to act like he knew what I was talking about, although he didn't. And he said, no, we don't do any arrangement. So we played the concerts, didn't play the moment. Okay, done with that. We get to recording. He comes up the morning of the recording session and says, yeah, we want the producer wants something. He says, really special. You know, there's this cornet solo in the ballroom. Said, you couldn't have told me this any earlier. Well, we had borrowed, most of my life, I never had a good cornet. We borrowed a couple of Bach cornets, which were not very good, from, I think, the University of Utah. And so we were going to play, so it'd be, in that regard, authentic. We got 2 trumpets playing and 2 cornets. Never mind what the differences of 100 years make in the evolution of the instrument. But so we're going to play that. And there was no part, and I didn't have the part. The librarian had to hand copy out a part for me to play. And in the break between recording sessions, I had to teach myself that solo. So we did it. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough time to really work it up, and technique was never my strong suit anyway. So right towards the end, it was going so fast. I did simplify just a touch, but mostly I played it, you know, and it's different, but that was that particular adventure.
That's pretty adventurous, playing the ball solo with no time to look at it on a recording session.
Yeah. Well, you know, what are you going to do? So
yeah,
it's your job. You know, I've said that a lot of times. People complain about something, or they whine about, oh, gee, this is hard. Well, yeah, okay, it's your job. You know, if it was easy, we could have call in some schlub from off the street and stick a horn in his hand and here, do this. You know, you can't do that. But when you reach some level of qualification, i.e. professional, it doesn't matter what it is, you're supposed to do it. And we all know that sooner or later, if you play enough music, there's something that you're not actually going to play maybe perfectly, or you're not going to do everything just the way you would possibly hope you could, but you gotta give it your all.
It goes with the territory.
It goes with the territory. That's exactly right.
So, talk about those three music directors you had in Utah and what the differences were with these guys.
Well, Abravanel had amazing, he was one of these guys with the charisma, and he had a great vision. And it's always to his credit that in a place like Salt Lake City, which especially in the 50s and 60s, was not like a cultural hotspot. And he had conducted on Broadway. A lot of people didn't know that, but he did Kurt Weill. In fact, he did some, forget which one it was, Knickerbocker Holiday or one of them on, back in the day. And he saw an opportunity, and it was a good fit. The culture there tends to be patriarchal, I think it's fair to say. And so to have a boss on the podium who says, do this, yeah, everybody's going to do their very best to do that. And he had a lot of, he was very musical. I mean, he had a lot of musical vision. I remember hearing a recording of the orchestra at the Music Academy of the West. When I was still a student at IU, I had friends that had been out there and played with him. And one of the concerts, the program was Firebird, Petrushka, and Rite of Spring. I'm like, oh, that's good. Yeah, that's a nice program. Well, in Utah, I played one with him that was Don Quixote and Heldenleben. So that's, he had some kind of tradition going on there. And I remember when I got to the Music Academy then and seeing Abravanel before he got through with the first measure, I was thinking, they played Rite of Spring with this? Like, how does that happen? Anyway, so he didn't have the clearest technique, but he had a clear musical sense of what he wanted, and people who really did their best. And it was, to be fair, when I got there in 1976, there were a lot of very talented musicians in it, but it was not a high-level professional orchestra, particularly some parts, some sections of the orchestra. And it got better in the time that I was there. The season got longer, really became a more professional orchestra in that time, which I'm thrilled about because I feel like I was there in a time that was really exciting because there was a great deal of growth and development of the orchestra. And then getting the new hall was fantastic. The orchestra was immediately better when we were able to move into that hall and didn't depend on playing at concerts in the Mormon Tabernacle. Yeah, for a lot of reasons. Bravanel, like every human, he had his strengths, he had his weaknesses. He had an associate conductor that really was not very well qualified, but he was musically he was very good. He was an intelligent guy, but he was very, very clumsy in his gestures, and it was really hard for the orchestra to play well with this guy. And I, for some reason, got elected to the orchestra committee, and then I was chairman of it for a time. And we tried to change that situation. And Abravanel was not happy with me for having had a hand in that. In fact, I paid a price for it because I went to, at the end of my second season, I'd been associate principal for 2 years. But when I got there, he said, I want you to play first on, these big pieces and stuff. And Bill Sullivan, who was an absolute sweetheart of a guy, had been the sole principal trumpet for years. And he had played first on everything, like before Tony got there. He played first on everything. And Bill was terrific. He said, whatever you want to play first on, fine. I'm fine with it. I've played all this stuff. And whatever you don't want to play, I'll play because it's my job. So I went to Abravanel. I said, I don't want to take anything away from Bill. He's principal trumpet. He should keep this title. But the job I'm actually doing is like co-principal. So I'd like that to be my title, and I'd like a raise. Well, we went back and forth, and actually I left his house and I didn't have anything promised, and I got upset with myself, and I called him on the phone, and I, did my best to negotiate something better, and I did. And then towards the end of the summer, I got a call from him and saying, yeah, he was able to get what we talked about, like he had to ask anybody else. I mean, the management was going to do whatever he said, right? So, but he finished the conversation with saying, okay, so I got what you wanted. Now do this, leave this business about the associate conductor, leave it alone, just drop it. And I said, well, Maestro, I'm sorry, but I'm elected to represent my colleagues in the orchestra. I can't just walk away from that. I take that seriously. Oh, fine. And he hung up. Well, not too long after that, we were playing Zarathustra. And because there'd been a little tension there, I wanted to just be extra positive about what was happening. Bill had this really nice Schilke F trumpet, which instead of going C to C on a C trumpet, you just go G to G. And there was no way I was going to miss the call.
Right.
So we get there and it comes up and stuff. Okay. Go on a little bit. Bravino stops. Quack, quack, something, the first violins. Play it again. Okay. Goes on a little further, stops again, makes another comment. Somebody else. Goes back. I played it again. Nail it. About this time, the first trombone player looks at me and says, what the hell is he doing? And I said, I know what he's doing. He's waiting for me to miss it. And then he's going to jump down my throat. He's going to be all over me. What he doesn't know is I'm not going to miss it. And so for the last time we went through, I pushed my music stand to the side and I pointed the bell right at his face. And when it came, I did what I had done 3 times before and drilled it.
Yeah.
Went on and it was done. And he didn't speak to me again.
Like ever?
In any, I'd make some general comment. First try with this and this, but it was, we finally, like, I don't know, after he was away from the orchestra, we had some kind of coming together a little bit again. But
wow.
Yeah, so it was like, that's, it was like, I started calling it the whack-a-mole orchestra. If you get your head up a little bit farther than everybody else, whack, that's the one that's gonna get clobbered. So there was that, but we did great recordings. We did a set of the Sibelius symphonies with him, which really holds up, I think, pretty darn well. He had a really good handle on that stuff. He did some other things, the repertoire that people didn't do. There was a couple of Mio things that were not like standard repertoire stuff, and he was smart in doing that. Why? Who's going to buy a recording of Beethoven 5 with the Utah Symphony when you can just as easily get Berlin and Boston and all of that? But Mio, it's a really interesting composer. There isn't any recording of this, or there is one, but it's from 25 years ago in France. Right. So we did some stuff like that. Bloch, Sacred Service, that was also kind of neat. And so there was that, and we did tours. Then one of the highlights was going to playing Bruckner Symphony Zero, Die Nolte, in the Bruckner Halle in Linz, and going to the St. Florian Monastery where Bruckner's remains are underneath the chapel. And we heard the then organist play one of Bruckner's organ pieces, few organ pieces, on the organ that Bruckner played. That was pretty special.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we did a lot of regional touring. Some of it was, kind of a drag, but some of it was fun too. I like traveling. I like being out. And then you mentioned the other music directors. Kojan was in over his head. Kojan, when he started the first rehearsal, this is after Abravanel had retired. And when he started the first rehearsal, I hadn't read anything about him. I didn't know anything about him. And I saw like 3 bars and I'm going, geez, this guy has watched Zubin a lot. It turned out he had been associate concertmaster of the LA Philharmonic. So he'd watched Zubin from 10 feet away. Yeah, a lot. And he was flashy, European, energetic, and all of that. And some things he did pretty well, but he didn't learn repertoire quickly. And then he had some errors of judgment that ended his tenure there, that were personal, that were outside the music, but we did some good stuff with him. I was not a fan at all when he came in. And this was kind of a new process for our colleagues then to go through evaluating conductors and having guest conductors and playing with them. And we did extensive conductor evaluations on all these people. And then some people were so excited about him coming. It's great. You know, he's going to be something fantastic. And then when they found out that he was, well, you know what? He's a human being and he's imperfect like the rest of them. They were ready to, you know, throw him to the wolves. And by that time I was, although he oh, well, that's the other part of the Abravanel story and the tie-in. When, yeah, because it was much later when Abravanel and I actually spoke. When Kojun became music director, I was on a long list of people that were put on notice. And the reason that was there was just retribution from Abravanel. And so I figured the longer that I was on notice and the better I played, the worse Kojun would look. And some of my colleagues, frankly, just folded. And the pressure was too much. It was a very, very unfair situation. It was very tense and it was an unhappy bunch of people in many ways for quite a while in there.
Change when Silverstein?
Oh yeah. So the next conductor search, we knew a lot more, and we're looking, you know, at some really good people. I was really happy with Silverstein. I had the best relationship with Joe Silverstein that I had with any music director.
Yeah.
He appreciated what I was doing. He appreciated my musicianship. He appreciated how I was conscientious about doing the best of what I could do, and the way we worked together. It was terrific. He immediately, the string quality of the orchestra improved immediately. Just because it was Joe Silverstein, you know. Right. And then he also did some things then where he was working with people that made it better. And he also instituted a chamber orchestra series, which helped the orchestra divide up. It was playing a lot for ballet, like 10 weeks a year for Ballet West, and we were doing with the opera. And then, so he had the idea, well, let's hire more extras, or we could use part of the orchestra to do chamber. We should be playing more small pieces. This is the way people learn to play good ensemble playing. So that was interesting, and played a lot of good repertoire that way. There were only two things I got a little hacked with Joe a couple of times. We started doing recordings, and first thing you know, we're recording the Beethoven Violin Concerto and the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto and the Brahms Violin Concerto and the Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto and the Barber Violin Concerto, all with Joseph Silverstein as the soloist. I was thinking, what are we, a backup band? Yeah. You know, so that was, he took advantage of the opportunity. And there are some fine recordings there. I mean, there's some really, really great stuff. And we did some other things too, but that was kind of funny.
Is that when you did Santa Fe Opera also?
Yeah, that overlapped. And then I did Santa Fe from 78 to 79 and 80. And then I couldn't go back in 81. That was when we were going into the new hall and just before Kojun came or something. I don't remember exactly how it worked now, but it was like they didn't want me to be gone that long, even though they would have saved money, because whoever they were going to hire to fill out, they were not going to pay them as much as I was getting. Right. So, and Santa Fe was a fantastic experience. By the time I left IU, with the way opera is so big around here, I really was not all that keen on, do I really want to go someplace and play nothing but opera in the summer? But there was fantastic musicians, beautiful production. There was another guy there, the music director I had a very good relationship, was the founder of the Santa Fe Opera, John Crosby, who always conducted the Strauss operas and Puccini. So Tosca, La Boheme, it was just so beautiful. It was fantastic. And the first 2 years that I was there, we did Salome, which was great and really challenging and exciting. And in 80, we did Electra, which is an even longer, intense psychodrama.
Yes.
And super challenging. its way. Oh, we were talking about highlights earlier in conductors. One of the biggest highlights came with Santa Fe Opera the summer that we did the completed 3-act Lulu of Alban Berg. Berg only wrote 2 operas, Wozzeck and Lulu, and he died before he could complete the 3rd act. And for decades, composers begged his widow to let them finish it, and she finally relented. And the world premiere of the completed Lulu was done by Pierre Boulez at the Paris Opera in the summer of 1980, I think it was. And then we did the American premiere in Santa Fe with Michael Tilson Thomas conducting. I played with Tilson Thomas in Israel already, and then I also played with him in Utah and in Santa Fe. So I had good working relation with him as well. And that was certainly a highlight. That was thrilling. Every night when we finished that, I was drained. I mean, physically it was hard, mentally to be concentrated, and emotionally it's so dark. It's such a terrible, awful story. You expect people to die in opera. I mean, this is what they do, but yeah, Lulu is particularly ugly.
Yeah, but
fantastic. Yeah. And then I went back in 90. I was here teaching for a year, and I forget who was it, Paul Randall? I think Paul Randall had played first and then couldn't go that summer. So I went back in 90 and played. Yeah, and that was great. Those were wonderful times.
Talk about that transition though. You just mentioned being there when the IU job came open. How did all that happen? Because teaching
yeah. Well, I always had some private students. I mean, a little bit from the time I was in high school, not too much in college. Although I taught the younger son of a school friend of mine for a while. I was adjunct at the University of Utah and had a few students. I did the brass group there for a while. We had a trumpet ensemble at the time. So I did a little more teaching, but it was still, I mean, the orchestra playing was by far and away that was my prime job, and that was the main deal. I was invited. I had a mutual friend, and I got an invitation to teach trumpet at the University of New Hampshire Summer Youth Music School in Durham, New Hampshire, in the summer of would have been 88, I guess. And the trumpet teacher in New Hampshire was a guy named Bob Stibler. And we got acquainted, very nice guy. And we put a quintet together and played some stuff. And of course, talking one day, he said, Alan Dean is leaving Indiana. I don't know, what? Alan I had known of for years with his quintet playing, and I knew he was been on the faculty at Yale, and I did know that he'd gone and he was teaching at Indiana for a few years. But when he said that, my ears really perked up. Oh, really? No, I didn't know that. And so I started to make inquiries. I called Charlie Gorham and said, yeah, Alan's leaving. I said, oh, what do I have to do? I'm going to apply. After I thought about it, because I was like, I'm 40. I always kind of thought maybe I'd play full-time professionally until I'm like 50, and I should be young enough and still playing. Then it'd be great to go have a life like I saw the life that Charlie Gorham and other faculty had here at IU, and it's the IU School of Music, so it's great. It's great musicians. And I don't know, maybe. And then I realized, yeah, but when I'm good and ready to step down from an orchestra spot, that opening at IU might not be open or something comparable. And I couldn't see myself teaching in, some community college and, in Nevada or somewhere, not to diss Nevada. Yeah, so I applied for the job, and then I was one of 4 finalists, and I knew I was up against some stiff competition because 2 of the guys were from the Philadelphia Orchestra. It was, no, Yeah, well, anyway, there were two guys from the Philadelphia Orchestra, and we had two trombones on the faculty who had played in the Philadelphia Orchestra. So I'm thinking, they kind of got an in here. But when it came down to it, I was not only one of four finalists, but they offered me the job.
Yeah.
And so I took it. I was really dissatisfied with the management in Utah at that time. There were a couple of colleagues that also behaved very badly. And, I thought, as much as I love playing in an orchestra full time, I think this is time to go make a move and get out of here. And I'm tired of playing the same notes that they play in Chicago and Boston and Vienna. And after 13 years in the orchestra, my salary is like, first year backstand second violin in, St. Louis Symphony or something. It's too much. And there was the promise of the benefits of a big school, a big state school, and I'm the sole support of my family. So it just seemed like that would be the thing to do. So I did. They hired me. I was hired as a visiting professor for the first year. And I gave Utah Symphony notice, and they said, okay, we've got to know by January 1st if you're coming back. I understand you're not going to be here for fall of 89, but if you're not going to be here fall of 90, we have to know by January 1st. Okay. So when I came here and started to teach, I said to the dean that I have to know in time to notify the Utah Symphony if I'm not coming back. And he said, okay, we'll do that. And in October, I got a word that the dean wanted to see me, and he said the brass department has met and they have decided at this point. I mean, I'd only been teaching for like 6 weeks or something. They said they want you. So, okay, which was good because I had loaded up everything and we'd sold our house and I'd moved from Utah. I decided if there's a time to put all the eggs in this basket, this is the time. I'm going for it. I'm not coming back.
And at that time, that had been Gorham and you and Edelstein. Am I right?
That's correct. Yeah. Bernie had been here 1 year or 2 years before me, just before me, because Charles Webb, who was the dean then, came to, actually, I heard he was coming to Salt Lake, and he was going to be part of the accrediting process of the National Association of Schools of Music, looking at the program at the University of Utah. So I arranged to meet him for lunch. And I remember saying, gee, I want to thank you for hiring Bernie Edelstein, because I'm going to go audition for his job in Cleveland, which I did. I obviously didn't get, but then it was like, I think just a year later then. And fortunately, I had thought to ask him about degree requirements for the faculty position. I said, I only have a bachelor's degree. And he said, oh, for applied faculty, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I mean, Phil Farkas, who had been principal horn in Cleveland and Chicago and Boston, three of the big five, had to do his GED, because he started playing so early. And Bernie did not have a college degree.
I think he got a high school diploma, right?
Yeah. So I knew, okay. I had actually, as a feeler, just out of curiosity, I had sent, and I had a little contact a couple of times with people at other schools. I saw a job opening, some small school in California. And I wrote, they never even bothered to answer me. And I'd been principal trumpet. I was like, I'm somebody who's got some kind of reputation here.
Yeah.
And find out. And then the guy who used to teach at Michigan State, Don Bullock, died suddenly, and Steve Jones, who was the other trumpet teacher, called me and was asking if I had a grad student or somebody to come fill in. And I started asking him some questions, and Steve said, wait a minute, are you interested in the job? I said, well, I don't know, I might be. But then they had sent out the job requirements where it required a doctorate, or at least a master's and a doctorate in process or something. So, okay, well, I'm out. Yeah, but it's the biggest places, it's not the academic credential, it's what you've done. And of course, the truth be told, there are times when people are fantastic players and it turns out they're really not that good at teaching. And vice versa. There are people who have not had fantastic professional careers who could be wonderful teachers.
Right.
Well,
yeah. Yeah. By the way, I'm sorry to hear the squeaking here. The dog is.
Oh.
No, but it's okay. If you're wondering why I'm going mute and unmute, it's because it's depending on what kind of noises he's making. Do you have any stories about teaching with Bernie?
Well, the first one that comes to mind, I can't repeat. Was
the little bit of time I had with him, he always had some fun anecdotes or criticism, I would say.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there was a good bit of that. There are two things that Bernie would say that I liked. One was, he turned the page and he said, Christ, that note's an octave higher than my salary. and the other one was that he attributed the longevity of his career to the shortness of his memory.
That's a great statement.
Because he wouldn't get worked up about some piece going. He'd just find himself in rehearsal and turn the page and go, "Oh, wow, that's hard." Which if he'd been thinking about it before then, he might have been worried or something. Just no, turn the page, play.
We went to his house in Sarasota, and he had a wall of all the conductors he had played under with Ryan.
Oh man,
and they're all signed to him. And I said, "So who were your favorite conductors to play under?" And he said, "The dead ones."
Yeah. I heard a story years ago. There used to be one of the trumpet players in the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra who had a list of living conductors that they might encounter on the inside of his locker door. And every time one of them died, he made a big ceremony about taking out a felt tip pen and crossing another name off the list. People who aren't musicians and haven't played in the orchestra don't appreciate this. I mean, it's conductor jokes and this kind of stuff. They think, why would you say such terrible things? I even had a couple of conductor jokes I learned how to say in German because we were in Germany for so long and I was meeting people. One of them was about the ideal weight for a conductor. The ideal weight for a conductor, 10 ounces, not counting the urn.
Right. Very happy dad joke there.
Yeah, so there's that. Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that.
Well, while we were on here, I wanted to, before I get to what I was about to do, you also took some lessons with Arnold Jacobs too. Can you kind of talk about
what
that did for you?
Well, that was fantastic. I mentioned Gene Picorni before. Gene, I love telling stories about Gene because when he joined the Israel Philharmonic, his first season there was my last. Mm-hmm. And I had heard terrific tuba players my whole life. I mean, really from high school, I knew good tuba players. And of course at IU, there were always fantastic tuba players around. And Gene did not impress me very much when he showed up. Matt Garbett, his predecessor, was a whiz kid, very talented, okay. And Gene could, he's big. He seemed kind of like a little bit of a lummox, but Gene worked. And it's like what I said at the beginning. He knew how to work. And that's why he ended up being in the Chicago Symphony, because he's fantastic. Well, Gene came to Utah, played a couple of seasons. And during that time, we had one year where there was a whole series. There was a whole bunch of orchestras came. Pittsburgh came, and Chicago and New York. And so Gene had arranged for Arnold to come to his house and he could work with him, and said, boy, you ought to get a lesson with him. And I'd heard this before. So it's like, okay, great. I'm going to have a lesson with Mr. Jacobs. And I did. And then subsequently had a couple other lessons with him in Chicago. And, he analyzed my playing just right off the bat, because, he's seen a lot of us doing what we do. And he said, you're using entirely too much diaphragmatic pressure. You're working against yourself. And he said, if you continue the way you are, you're going to shorten your career by several seasons. Well, that got my attention. So, okay, what do we do? And then he talked about soft and move air in, out, not working it just like this. And, the sound imagery, but to, understand the difference between using pressure and have you clench your fist or make on your hand, or when you're really compressing, and then feel I remember thinking, well, yeah, maybe that works on tuba, but does that work on trumpet? Oh yeah, actually it does. So, so immediately, within like 3 minutes, he had me making more sound, a better sound for much less effort than I've been putting into it. So, okay, this works. This is what I'm going to do. Even I'm a professional now for many seasons. I'm on my second job. This is better. This is what I need to do. And he said, now don't practice this. Don't try to play this way yet. But of course, me being me, that night in the pit, playing for the ballet or opera or whatever it was, I'm trying to go and just, it was not my habit. And sure enough, I didn't have that coordinated well enough. And, I'm coming in early, I'm coming in late. I got a big smile on my face because when it works great. And people around me looking, what the hell is the matter with him? What's he doing? But it completely turned me around. That one lesson was probably the single most important lesson as far as how to play music on my instrument that I ever had. Yeah, it was truly inspiring. And then I did my best to incorporate into my teaching my best understanding of what he did and what he said. One of my students gave me one time some of his breathing exercises, and it was written in this kind of vernacular that, since I'd worked with him, I knew what he was talking about, but looking at it in print, for somebody else who hadn't been there, somehow there were some things that wouldn't quite make sense. So I did my own kind of rewrite of some of that stuff, but I used to hand it out to people. And here's my understanding. Give me any questions you have about it. But it was fantastic.
Well, speaking of your teaching, there are a few of your old students here, and especially Mr. Peterson here.
Yeah.
Travis, asking you unmute.
Hi, Mr. Cord.
Hi, Travis. Great to see you.
Hi. It's good to see you too. It's been a while.
Yeah. I always tell people that it's kind of ironic to me that, having grown up during the Vietnam era, where I never wanted to have anything to do with the military. I respected that. I had relatives who served, and I respect that, and I felt badly for the people that went, but boy, I don't want to go. And so I devoted my life and was fortunate to have a career as an orchestral player. And there's my son as well. And yet I've probably had more students who have been really successful at getting really top military band jobs. Travis is one of the relatively few, or comparatively few, people that's got a great orchestra job. And I'm always proud of that, especially, if it had to be one person getting one job, for Travis to be in a chair that I held.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
It's fantastic.
Full circle for me, I got to say. I never would have thought I'd ever be in Salt Lake City in your chair, all these years later. But it's pretty neat. I've only played at the Tabernacle a couple times. I know you guys used to play there all the time.
Yeah.
But the couple times I've been in there, and even in a Bravenel hall too, sometimes I remind myself, I'm like, Cord was sitting right here playing the exact same notes that I'm playing right now. So it's pretty special, I gotta say.
Yeah. It's pretty special for me too. And you're still, every once in a while, you're running across parts and you're going to see my markings in them, right?
Absolutely. Because I pointed out, before Norton, who was your second trumpet player, before he retired, he would often sit next to me and play second with me sometimes.
Yeah.
And you write your E's a very specific way.
Yeah.
I can't remember how you do it exactly, but I know what they look like. So like anytime that I'd see that in the page, I was like, there's Mr. Cord's handwriting. This must be from the 80s or maybe late 70s, you know. It's great because all the markings are fantastic and they're helpful, you know, for playing the piece, whether it's like check 5 or whatever it is, but it's pretty cool. It's like this it's just neat. I love it
a couple of times I copied parts. You know, one of the fun things about rental parts, they travel around. There was particularly my part for Electra in Santa Fe had been signed by first trumpet players all the way back to like 1910.
Wow.
From the first publication of the opera. And there was Don Reinberg from San Francisco Opera, and I forget who else. You know, I had first seen that. Well, actually, I first saw it in Cleveland. The first time I auditioned for the Cleveland Orchestra when I was still a student, and Dave Zauder, who was the personnel manager in second trumpet, put up the next excerpt, and it was Don Juan. And he pointed up to the corner and he says, "This probably looks familiar." And it was the initials LD for one of my teacher, Lou Davidson, who played those parts, you know, and marked it. And I always thought that's really quite a nice thing. We're part of this community. We have this shared experience, you know, whether it's the challenge of playing that particular music or with this conductor or our own playing or whatever instrument we're playing, all that. It's a nice thing.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, the notes that you put in some of these parts, they're be played better because, you know, you'll write something in there and it's actually official for me performing the piece in the moment, you know.
Yeah, good.
To think about something in a certain way or whatever. So it's really good. And I got to say too, with you mentioning the Korn recordings and the Berlioz from Kojin back in the early 80s. I remember when I came to IU, my first year, when I was a freshman, played me those in your studio, and I was just like, "Oh, what's this?" Because I was into core, and you were trying to like get me to, you know, hear good music and recognize that it was really good. Yeah. I remember you specifically playing those, and I was like, "Oh, that's cool." Not until now, I listened to Korngold Seahawk recording, especially. I think is just like one of the best recordings I think that exists of anything. I mean, you sound just ridiculously good on it. So it inspires me all these years later. You know, it was back in the early 80s, and I still find inspiration listening to that stuff. Even the Berlioz too. Yeah. It's amazing. And I didn't know that story about they just threw it at you and you learned it in the break, basically.
Yeah.
That's impressive.
Yeah. Thanks. Well, that's good to hear that, Travis. I just tried to be explicit in my marks, knowing that at some point somebody else might have to play with this. And I always just detested opening a part and seeing where somebody scribbled some crap in, or they put marks for the beats, but they did it in such a way it covered an eighth rest, or that covered some other bit of information you need to have. I hated that. So I got quite a reputation, especially they used to laugh at me in Indianapolis because I subbed there so often and played extra. That I always had a big eraser, and you know, I'd find one of these parts and I'm going, you know, and they could say, "Oh, Cord was sitting here." They could see the mess of all the erasers on the floor, and then it's like this. And I even had one of the guys in the section up there. Sometimes they, "Are you going to mark this for me too?" Would you?
Travis, there aren't any fingerings written in your music, right?
Every note has things on it from Mr. Cord. No, I'm just kidding. No, not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all.
Mm.
And also your earliest student, I think, is on here, BJ.
Yeah. Hi, son. How are you?
There we go. Hey.
Yeah.
Good evening. How are you?
Great. Thanks. Boy, I didn't have any idea we'd take this much time, Mark.
Oh no! Well, look, you've done a lot of stuff, and it's all really interesting to hear a lot of that history and the people you're around, and I wanted to bring Travis and BJ in, and Susan Ryder was going to come in too, but she's got a concert tonight, so she was is coming in.
She's one of the lucky few who has a concert.
That's right.
Yeah.
All the nights for this to be the one. I wanted to ask BJ, what is it like studying with your dad?
Well, he's taught so many amazing students over the years, but he probably hasn't taught a whole lot of beginners, So I'm one of the very few people that got to got to learn from him all the way from, this is what a trumpet is and this is how you hold it. And, you know, so I always consider myself to be as much of a spoiled brat of a trumpet player as you can possibly be. Because, I got the benefit of just world-class instruction from, the first time someone ever handed me a trumpet to try to figure out how to make a sound on it.
Yeah, I think of you and Mike Chikowitz both having fathers who are famous teachers is an unusual situation with that. And both of you kind of music than their fathers too.
Yeah. Well, I think that's been a great thing. I think a lot of people who play the same instrument as their parent, the parent might push them really hard or have, I don't know, always be on their case about how much they're practicing or whatever. And that was never our vibe that we had. It was like, he was always with me like, well, if you want to do this, do it. I'll help you do it. But he didn't push it on me. He didn't tell me I had to be a good trumpet player or anything. So it's never felt like something that I do because, because I was forced to or coerced into doing it. And the fact that I sort of moved towards a lot of jazz playing from the time I was a teenager, I think was really cool because, it meant that my playing wasn't exactly the same thing that my dad does, and so there's something, I even remember a time in high school where you were playing a piece that had some improvisation in it, and I was studying all these complex chord changes and stuff, and I'm like 16 years old, and he's asking me like, what's up with these chord changes? Like, what am I supposed to play over this? Because I was studying all the David Baker, complicated jazz harmony and stuff, and that's not totally his area of expertise. So he was asking me for help. So I always thought that was really cool that I got to do the same thing as him, but we don't do exactly the same thing. That's been great.
Yeah, that is cool.
Well, and I also wanted to bring up the fact that obviously you work for Dave Bonnet now, and that's a long association with your dad, and you guys have that in common. And maybe you guys could kind of talk about that for a second.
Well, I met Dave through Charlie Gorham. Actually, I'd heard of him when he was still working I think he was still working at Will's Music in Salem. Have you ever been down there, BJ?
I have not, no.
No. And Dave started out by making lead pipes. And then there was a repairman in Salt Lake City who got some of the lead pipes, and I put one on the only Bach B-flat trumpet that I ever had. And it was great. It really made a wonderful improvement. But it was Charlie Gorham had met him, and Charlie was the one who encouraged Dave to really pursue making a trumpet. And Dave went out of his way to hook up with people like Bobby Shue and Doc Severinsen very early on. And, but he came to Bloomington, which is where he made his first trumpets. And there's lots of stories. BJ's heard a lot of them. I know some of them about Dave getting started. But when I first played one of Dave's horns was here in Bloomington in 1984. And I think Dave was still here, or he had just recently moved to Chicago. Do you know what year he went to Chicago?
It was 84, but I don't know if it was before or after.
Well, at IU, we had the International Brass Congress here. And so the Tubist, what was then the Tubist Universal Brotherhood Association and the International Trombone Association and the International Horn Society and the International Trumpet Guild were all here. And there were brass players from all over the world. And I got off the elevator, was staying in Reed, which is horrible. And got off the elevator with a trumpet player that I'd known earlier. And he said, have you played one of the Monets yet? And I said, no. He said, well, you got to play it. It's fantastic. I've got, I think he said at that point he had one and he had one ordered. And so I met Dave then here in Bloomington, and when I played a horn, okay, that's pretty cool. And between talking to him and playing the horn and talking to Charlie Gorham, I decided to order a trumpet. And yeah, and then the next year at the Trumpet Guild, I heard a recital by this trumpet player that had encouraged me to see Dave, and I heard him playing on his Monet trumpet, and I remember sitting in the audience thinking, oh my God, what have I done? Because I didn't like the way he sounded at all. But it turned out it was him, it wasn't the trumpet.
Well, Dave Monet often says, you know, trumpets don't have sounds, players do.
Players have sounds, yeah. And,
important to remember.
Yeah, that's right. I'm glad I didn't mention that guy's name. No. Anyway, that was it. So Dave and I worked together for a long time, off and on. I had great times going up to the shop in Chicago at maybe three different locations up there. I was at all of them. Yeah, I was at the one where he had his gigantic gong kind of in the lobby outside the shop itself. And here, come here and lay down. You lay on your floor, on the floor, stretched out on your back, and give the gong a nice whack. And you can just go all zen away for 20 minutes listening to this thing vibrate. That was fantastic. So all the special stuff, and we've shared things over the years. We're actually very close, I would say. He's one of my best friends. And yeah, so it's been interesting to work on trumpets with him. And when he got going with the mouthpieces, and BJ and his colleagues in the jazz band at Bloomington North High School all got to benefit from that connection, because we were always pretty sure that it was the only high school band in the country that had a trumpet section exclusively on Monet mouthpieces.
we were pretty proud of that. Yeah. We were pretty cool. Yeah.
Justifiably. And Dave continues to do just remarkable work. All his stuff, you and I talked about this a few days ago, Mark, about synthesizing, the necessity to synthesize information you get from one different teacher or another. Well, the one lesson I had with Vincent Chikowitz, the one lesson I had with Jimmy Stamp, the 3 lessons I had with Arnold Jacobs, and the time that I worked with Dave Monet and one of my school colleagues, who's also one of Dave's friends, John Hennis, about effective use of the body and getting tension out of one's playing. That's been absolutely key. That is so tremendously helpful. Dave knew I was going to Hong Kong one time for 7 years. I was a trumpet teacher and a brass coach with the Asian Youth Orchestra. And he had a client in Hong Kong who bought a trumpet, and he was complaining that he couldn't make it work very well. So Dave said, would you I'm asking this guy to hook up with you while you're there, and maybe you can help him out. Well, the guy was all twisted up and tight, and he couldn't have played any instrument very well. But the Monets especially, if you try to just muscle it and force it, it's not going to work very well. And I've heard a lot of pretty good players who I knew had really good trumpets in their hands, and they didn't sound very good. I had one student here for a time who had a trumpet that was more expensive than any of mine were, heavier. And he had some little sweet spot where he sounded fantastic, but for most of his playing, he didn't. When he came to me, he didn't sound very good at all, and it's because he was just twisted up and trying to play it incorrectly. And it was actually much easier than the way he was trying to get the job done. So that's been helpful, and that's been really key. I've really loved having his instruments, and I think it's made a difference. I wish that I had had more of them earlier on for some of those recordings that I did. We're in the process of selling an E flat that's fantastic. And boy, if I'd had that to do some of the Star Wars stuff, that would have made my life a lot easier.
But I think that's pretty cool that BJ, you're working for Monet, and that you guys have had this relation. Because there's pictures of you when you were a little kid I've seen on Facebook of you there when your dad's going with you and stuff like that. So that's pretty great.
Yeah, it's funny for me. I mean, I got my first mouthpiece from Monette when I was in the 7th grade, and my dad is good friends with Dave and a loyal client and has owned lots of horns and mouthpieces. So when I was getting a little more serious about my trumpet playing, and my dad called and said, I think we need to get a mouthpiece for BJ. And then this mouthpiece comes in the mail and they stamp BJ on it. And I mean, I thought I was the coolest 7th grader in the whole band, in the whole region band. I had my gold mouthpiece with my name on it, not that I really earned that, but through my luck of the draw. But when I started working at the shop, I was looking through some client files, and I was like, oh, there's a client file with my name on it here. And I pulled it out, and there was the thank you note that I wrote when I was 13 years old to Dave Monette for sending me a mouthpiece. And it was one of those things like you were saying, Travis, and sort of things come first full circle. It's like, well, here I am. I didn't know when I wrote that thank you note when I was a 7th grader that that I'd be the guy that other people would call to help them with their mouthpieces or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah,
wow,
it's pretty cool.
cool. That's
great.
That's very cool. And I wanted to come back to something you said a little bit ago too about the synthesizing of, I mean, obviously I studied with John Ramos mostly and had a few lessons with you and Steve Burns, who was on a little while ago and said hi. And one thing I remember so much learning from you, I think you mentioned this sort of about when you were talking about Edelstein, was sort of having a short memory about some things. Or I remember coming to you when I was having a particular problem and you were like, I want you to write down every negative thought that comes in your head this week. And then at the end of the week, I want you to burn it, or throw it away. And for me, that was really important as a student to really learn that selective memory process and just how to stay positive when you're going through rough things or,
yeah.
I always really appreciate that. And I also would say that I remember playing a concert with you and we were playing for Lucas Foss, and you and I started chatting, and he looked at the trumpets and said, "Trumpets, I didn't hear you." And you said, "Me neither." And I thought, oh, this will be a good week.
Because we were supposed to play and we were talking instead of playing?
Yeah, we were talking, and then, but you said, "Me neither." I thought, all right, we're good. This is a good one.
I'm sure Travis has learned this too. Yeah, there's a certain aspect of doing what you do that you grow into it. It attracts a certain kind of personalities, but you also it colors your personality. There was I mentioned before that I subbed and I played a lot with the Indianapolis Symphony, including principal on some subscription concerts, as well as playing assistant to Chappie Perry a lot and just doing all kind of stuff in the section. We were doing the Bartok Concerto for orchestra a few seasons ago, and I was playing 3rd trumpet. And the conductor, who was somebody who was very good, I don't remember right now, said the next to the last note, there's a note that is only in the 3rd trumpet that determines the chord somehow. Now I forget exactly what the specifics are, but but the conductor looked back at me and he says, we want to be sure that we hear that note. And I said, oh, you'll hear it. And so Bob Wood, who's playing 2nd trumpet, looked over at me and, yeah, that was spoken like a 1st trumpet player.
Absolute confidence.
Which is true. Yeah. We all, you learn to do and say things, and sometimes you regret them, and sometimes it's okay. You mentioned Silverstein, so I'll say one quick story about Silverstein. I don't remember what we were playing, but there was something that we were, laying down the time, and he looked back when he stopped rehearsal, and he said, trumpets, you're late, or you're too slow or something. And I knew exactly what he was talking about, and I knew what was happening in that situation, and it was not us. And I said, and I said without hesitating, no, actually, it was the violins that are rushing, and which of course got, you know, feet shuffling and a lot of ooh, you know, from my colleagues. But I had the great satisfaction then when we went back and went past that passage. I see him, he's got one eye under these really bushy eyebrows, and one eye, he's looking back at me, and his ear is cocked over to the violins, and he's listening and he's listening, and I see him, you know, he's right. That was very satisfying. but you got to know your audience. You can't always. We used to have a camerata orchestra here in town that was some faculty and playing with students, and one reason I kept doing it as much as I did was that I could have my students play in the rest of the section. And one of the guys later told me how much he appreciated the one time when I got his attention. We were about to stop, and I had something to say to the conductor, and I said, "Now, don't say this. Don't do this. You're a student. Don't do this." But I said I said something to the conductor to point out his shortcoming in some way or other, you know, because he was screwing us up for giving a goofy beat or something or other. But I wanted to be sure the student didn't try to do that, because he's not in that position with me. What's he going to do? Fire me? You know, I don't care. I'm basically a volunteer there. So yeah, but you have to do it.
Well, I'm so grateful you did this chat tonight and got to tell all these amazing stories. I mean, the stuff you were talking about with Israel was particularly powerful, I thought, and you know, all these different conductors and your teaching, and it's great to see your student in your old chair and your son at the place where you've made your instruments. How weird is that? You know?
Yeah.
But
it's pretty cool.
Yeah, very cool. And you know, thanks so much for doing it. And hopefully my dog didn't make too much noise.
No, it's fine. Thanks for inviting me, Mark. I really appreciate it. And thanks for setting this up. Dot, great to see you. Mike, I can't see you, but thanks for being there. Saw Zania earlier. This is a cousin and his wife and cousin.
And well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to sign off Facebook Live, but just hold on 1 second while I click goodbye. And thank you everybody for watching this. This will be archived on my YouTube channel, Mark's Mouthpiece. And if you would please subscribe. And if you feel like watching interviews over and over and you want to let your computer run all night, get my numbers up, you can feel free to do that. So thanks so much. And I'll see you next time.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Good seeing you, Mr. Cord.
All right.
Good to see you, Travis. Be well. Stay safe, everybody.